April 26, 1974. Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Saratov. Late evening. Twilight was squeezing the city in its sticky embrace. The air, which had recently been fresh, was now thick, saturated with the bitterness of asphalt and the rot of the river. A white mist swirled over the Ossetia, creeping into the alleys of the soul. The streetlights, in their murky halos, dimmed at the snap of invisible fingers. Vyacheslav Demichev stood in the shadow of a poplar at the corner of Moskovskaya and Universitetskaya, wrapping himself in his overcoat. Although the evening was warm, his fingers nervously fumbled with a pack of Belomor cigarettes. 3 cigarettes remained untouched. The 4th trembled in his lips, leaving a bitter aftertaste of tobacco dust. The military uniform, carefully ironed in the morning, was already a bit wrinkled by the end of the day. He inhaled the smoke, feeling the nicotine spreading through his veins in warm waves. But it didn't help to stop the trembling in his knees, nor did it silence the army of voices in his head, which grew more insistent. Somewhere deep in his mind, a dark, sticky feeling stirred, growing stronger each day, filling all his thoughts. Lately, he caught himself staring at schoolgirls, their slender necks, pale knees, and innocent smiles. At first it was just a glance, then fantasies. Today this feeling burst out, like a ruptured abscess. Shadows. They crawled like living things, stretching into endless black tentacles, swallowing the last rays of the dying sun. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the thick veil of twilight, laughter rang out, too loud, too sharp. It cut through the silence, making Demichek flinch, as if someone had run an icy finger down his spine. With a sharp, almost animalistic movement, he turned his head, and his gaze pierced the figure coming out of the art school doors. Small, fragile, like a doll that's about to be broken. 11-year-old Darya Zavodnikova carried a folder with drawings under her arm, holding it to her chest with such care as if it wasn't just a gift, not just an album, but her own heart, torn from her chest and locked inside the cardboard. The last light of the spring sun, blood red like an open wound, clung to her light brown hair braided into plaits. Too neat, too clean. She was humming something, a thin, naive little voice, like a tinkling bell that could be crushed at any moment. Someone's heavy footsteps. She skipped along as if she didn't realize that the ground beneath her feet wasn't solid earth, but shifting ash, ready to collapse into the abyss at any moment. An ordinary child, not yet knowing, not yet suspecting. Demichev felt his saliva turn into a caustic acid in his mouth, and his tongue stick to the roof of his mouth. Something monstrous clenched in his chest. He nervously adjusted his collar, the collar of his tunic, his heart pounding, trying to burst out, and each beat echoed in his temples, like the tolling of a funeral bell. She walked on. He stood still, and the shadows closed in around them, ready to swallow her forever. Demichev took a step forward, blocking the sidewalk with his solid body. He deliberately pulled his army cap out of his pocket and put it on in a showy gesture, counting on a child's trust in the uniform. "Little girl." His voice sounded unnaturally sweet. "Will you help at the sports event? I need someone to hold the jump rope." His fingers nervously fiddled with his belt buckle. When he caught a moment of hesitation in her eyes, the trembling inside him grew stronger. Every second of waiting felt like an eternity. He saw her fingers gripping the folder tighter, her gaze darting around in search of salvation. Darya. While waiting for an answer, he took a crumpled candy out of his pocket, sticky from the heat, and offered it with a trembling hand as a gesture. At the same time, it was both a lure and a test of obedience. His foot had already taken a half step toward the vacant lot, his whole body indicating the direction he wanted to take her. Darya automatically reached for the candy, not realizing that this simple gesture would become her failure, Darya's first step into a nightmare. They walked through the vacant lot, overgrown with weeds and thorns that clung to the hem of her dress. Dasha kept looking back. The strange man was leading her somewhere toward the bus station. But there was no sign of the promised competition. Everything was quiet around them. Only the wind rustled through the dry grass as if whispering a warning. "Are we almost there?" she asked, feeling a lump in her throat. "Very close," Demichev replied. His voice sounded strange, as if someone else was speaking for him, as if he no longer controlled his own words.
The cemetery greeted them with silence.
The dilapidated crosses, tilted by time, resembled broken fingers reaching toward the sky in silent pleading. Somewhere in the bushes something rustled, maybe a cat, or maybe not a cat at all. Dasha instinctively pressed closer to her companion, but immediately pulled away. His body was cold. The crypt gaped like a black void among the grey slabs, and the massive door hung on a single hinge. As if inviting them in, Demichev pushed it, and it creaked open, releasing the smell of dampness, decay, and something else. Something sweet and rotten that made Dasha's heart skip a beat. "Here?" she whispered. Her voice trembled, and the answer was a rough hand digging into her shoulder, pushing her into the darkness. The darkness inside was almost tangible, thick like tar. The rays of the setting sun, breaking through the cracks in the ceiling, picked out eerie details from the gloom: crumbling plaster, cobwebs tangled in the corners, and stains, dark dried stains on the walls and floor. Dasha suddenly realized it, and her body was seized by a tremor. She tried to scream, but Demichev's hand roughly covered her mouth. His breathing became rapid and uneven in the dim light. His eyes gleamed like those of a hungry wolf ready to tear apart its prey. When he tore at her dress, Dasha realized this was the end, but her instinct for self-preservation proved stronger. She sank her teeth into his arm, tasting blood in her mouth, warm, salty, alive. Demichev howled in pain and punched her in the face. Demichev walked along the platform, trying not to attract attention. His arm hurt. The damned girl had left a bloody crescent on it. He had almost calmed down when he suddenly realized the handkerchief was missing. His memory helpfully reminded him that he had used it to wipe his hands after everything. The handkerchief must be in the crypt. When Demichev returned, he was met with a surprise that made his blood run cold. The darkness, usually obedient and silent, seemed to shudder with faint, hoarse sounds. Dasha wasn't just breathing, her lungs were sucking in air with a wheeze, each breath coming with effort, as if her chest was being squeezed. Seeing everything, the scariest part was not that. She was moving, clutching the rough bricks of the wall with her bloodied, raw fingers, trying to get up. Every movement left dark, sticky streaks on the stone, a trace of desperate struggle, a mixture of blood and dirt from her own flesh peeling off the bone. Her nails were broken, the skin on her hands torn, but she didn't stop, as if driven by a blind animal terror, and then she saw him. Dasha's eyes, clouded by pain, suddenly cleared, filling with such primal and icy hatred that Demichev, who was used to seeing fear in the eyes of his victims, involuntarily recoiled. There was no pleading or despair in that look, only a promise of revenge that would come before the victims. The air in the basement grew thick, as if the darkness itself had closed in. For a moment, Demichev thought the shadows behind Darya were moving, taking on someone's shape. She didn't say a word, but in the silence of the crypt, her silence screamed louder than any threat. And then rage overtook him. He grabbed the girl by the hair and slammed her head against the wall several times. Demichev let go, and the body slid lifelessly to the floor. But even that didn't seem enough. In the corner there were rusty coils of barbed wire, remnants of some kind of fence. Demichev started wrapping the girl with them, like a mummy, tightening the loops. The wire dug deeper and deeper into his own fingers, leaving bloody streaks. But he didn't stop until there was nothing left in front of him but a bloody bundle, from which only a pale hand was sticking out. On April 28, the Morozov couple was walking through the cemetery, hurrying to a birthday party at their relative's place. "Wait!" Galina suddenly exclaimed. "Do you hear that?" A faint moan was coming from deep inside the crypt. When they dared to look inside, a horrifying sight appeared before them. A bloody tangle of wire from which a pale child's hand was sticking out. Unfortunately, due to YouTube's censorship, I can't show some documentary materials here, so I'll leave them in the Telegram channel Strashnoti. Go check it out, subscribe and watch. The link is below the video. On May 1st in the city hospital, Darya had been in a coma for almost a month. The doctors were at a loss. Multiple fractures, a traumatic brain injury, blood loss. But the child survived. When the investigator came to her with a sketchbook, everyone expected that she wouldn't remember anything, but the girl's fingers confidently drew a face on the paper. Every wrinkle, every line. She especially captured the eyes well, mad, hungry eyes of a monster. June 20, 1974, the alley near the Petushok store, 21 days, 504 hours of waiting. Every moment was lived with painful intensity, as if someone was slowly screwing a red-hot screw right into my temple. His bed had turned into a swamp of crumpled sheets, soaked with sweat and anxious thoughts. Every night he woke up from his own moan, clutching his pillow, imagining how his fingers dug into tender, childlike skin. When her silhouette finally emerged from the sticky June darkness, a strange taste appeared in his mouth. He bit his cheek, holding back a wave of excitement. Everything matched down to the smallest details. The slender wrists, the slight limp. The habit of biting her lower lip when she was nervous. He knew everything about her from 3 weeks of observation. That precious black alley was given to him as a gift. A palm rested on her shoulder. The thumb found the hollow between her collarbone and neck, where her pulse beat especially clearly. She turned and he saw in her eyes that very moment, a microsecond between "something's wrong" and "help me." The military uniform with its shiny buttons did its job. There was no scream. The blow to the solar plexus was calculated perfectly, strong enough to knock the wind out of her, but not to cause harm. He liked it when they breathed, especially in the final moments. The stale bread the girl was holding hit the asphalt with a dull thud, scattering crumbs that were immediately gathered by nocturnal insects. The streetlight across the road seemed to wink at them in time with the flickering. Demichev methodically undid her buttons. Dresses popped open with a quiet snap, revealing faded underwear. Somewhere in the distance, a dog whimpered but immediately fell silent, as if even the animals understood that it was dangerous to interfere here. Her skin, under the yellow light of the street lamp, looked like porcelain. He ran his finger along her stomach, feeling the muscles trembling beneath the thin skin. They contracted in spasms, leaving strange patterns on her body, reminiscent of ocean waves. Demichev pressed her against the wall. The victim's pupils dilated so much that they almost swallowed the iris. Her lips moved, but there was no sound, only a rasp, as if a wad of cotton was stuck in her throat. He leaned in closer, inhaling the scent of childish fear, sweetish, with a hint of sweat and something else he couldn't identify. "Quiet," he whispered, running his finger along her cheek, leaving a wet trail. "It will all be over soon," but that was a lie. The worst was just beginning. Her body was still twitching. In the final convulsions, as Demichev began to tidy himself up, he carefully folded the clothes. A dress with flowers, worn-out panties, one shoe. The other was lost in the struggle. He wiped her face especially carefully. He liked it when they looked at him in the last moment. A clean, almost innocent face, except for the bruise under the eye. In the morning, the janitor Semyonov froze when he saw the aftermath. The broom fell from his hands, and the body was lying in a strange position, like a doll discarded by a capricious child. But what struck the old man most were the open eyes staring right at him, and the mouth was stuffed with something dark. Demichev left her completely naked, as if trying to erase the last traces of her identity. No clothes, no documents, only pale, lifeless flesh, pierced and mutilated. The authorities faced a problem. No one knew who this girl was. Under normal circumstances, identification would have happened through the morgue, through an announcement, but time passed and no relatives came forward. A shocking decision for Soviet society was made. The photograph of the deceased was shown on television. This was an unprecedented step in a country where television broadcasted crop yields and smiling news anchors. Suddenly, the image of the dead girl flashed on the screen, and people watching were frozen in horror. But the method worked. Soon, a girl came to the police, trembling from the shock. She recognized the murdered girl. It was her acquaintance, 16-year-old Yelena Vasilyeva. That's how the victim's name became known. The police officers went to Yelena's parents, expecting to see grief, tears and despair, but instead they were met with icy indifference. Investigator's office. The captain clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. The captain clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. The captain clenched his fists. Second floor, we're going back. Razgbert. We all signed this. The clock on the wall was ticking, counting the seconds, until the next loss of life. Gromov knew this man wouldn't stop, couldn't stop. He looked out the sooty window where clouds were gathering. Somewhere out there in the city, a man was already choosing his next victim, and it was impossible to stop him. In the evening, in an apartment on the outskirts, Demichev sat in the dark, studying his notes by the light of a single candle. There was wind outside the window, but he wasn't cold. A strange energy was singing in his veins. He recalled the events of tonight, and his fingers reached for the thick notebook. He needed to write down every detail. Before he forgot, he wanted to record how her body trembled, how her pupils widened, and how, in the last moment, her eyes filled not with fear, but with understanding. He smiled, looking at the shadow on the wall. It was strange. Today it was too big, with long fingers. Soon, he thought, closing the notebook. Very soon his throat felt scratchy. He wanted to drink. He reached for the glass of water, but suddenly stopped. No, not that. He wanted something else, something warm, something alive. 17-year-old Galina Yulibina, a young woman with delicate facial features. On that fateful July evening in 1974, her fate became entwined with a shadow that knew no mercy. Darkness gripped the streets in an icy embrace. The air thickened, saturated with fear. He could feel it, absorb it, crave it. Demichev walked on and already saw his victim, fragile, trembling, perfect. Shadows whispered behind his back, urging him on. He smiled. Soon, very soon. He acted methodically, knowing that resistance was useless. His hands, rough and sinewy, clenched into fists in anticipation, and the whisper of madness was already echoing in his mind, pushing him toward the final line. Galina didn't even have time to realize where the trouble came from. A sudden jerk, and her world narrowed to a dark alley where there were no witnesses, where screams were lost in the deaf walls, and despair became so thick it seemed tangible. He enjoyed her fear and helplessness. Every touch was mockery, every movement was torture. And then there was silence. Only the hoarse whisper of her last breath, only cold fingers tightening around her throat until the last light faded from her eyes. When it was all over, Demichev vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only a lifeless body that would be found at dawn. Demichev's last victim was Ella Tomich, as fragile as the first spring ice on the Volga. She was only 11 years old. The family came to Saratov for 2 weeks. The father, a medical service major, finally got a vacation after a year of service in the remote areas of Kazakhstan. The girl was happy about the holidays, the new places, the smell of the river, and being with her parents. Taking her to the amusement park, she didn't know she wouldn't even live to see the weekend. On that ill-fated evening, her father asked Ella to take some fresh bream to her grandmother. The old lady lived 5 minutes away near the Petushok store. The girl was walking, going over her plans for tomorrow in her head, when he came out from around the corner. "Hello, hello, sunshine." His voice was warm, honeyed, just like a friendly uncle's. "Can you tell me what time it is?" When she stopped, he suddenly bent down as if to tie his shoelace. His breath smelled of cheap port wine and something metallic. Oh, look! In his suddenly opened palm, something small and feathered was twitching. "A baby bird fell out of the nest. Will you help me save it?" That was the 27th time he used a baby bird, a similar trick. He led her not to Grandma's, not to the house, but to a construction tower on the outskirts. With each step the houses became fewer, and the darkness enveloped them, hiding them from prying eyes. "There's a spot here with these bushes." Suddenly his fingers dug into her wrist so hard that her bones cracked. The last thing Ella saw were his eyes, inhuman, glassy, like the dead pike her father brought back from fishing yesterday. When mushroom pickers stumbled upon the spot a week later, at first they thought it was a rag, until they noticed the braids with blue ribbons, and above, on a broken branch, a crow was sitting, methodically pecking out the eyes of a dead sparrow. Demichev left him there on purpose. A thin voice, trembling between tears and terror, painted the image of a maniac in a military uniform. The police combed through barracks, military academies, and lists of deserters. Each person checked was not him. Every lead led nowhere. The investigation was at a standstill until the iron hand of the regional prosecutor's office closed in on it. All the threads, bloody, broken, tangled, were brought together into one case, one for everyone. The investigators understood that nearby there was still a person walking around who looked at children and saw not people but objects for his twisted fantasies. He had already taken lives and would do it again. But everything came down to the uniform. Was it a real military uniform or just something similar? Was the maniac actually wearing epaulettes, or was he just pretending? Investigator Vikorev worked himself to exhaustion. His eyelids felt heavy as lead, and a dull pain throbbed in his temples. The station was filled with the thick smell of sweat, tobacco, and stale coffee, the scent of despair. He especially hated those childhood photos, the smiling, carefree faces of the girls who would now remain frozen in time forever. Their eyes seemed to look at him with silent reproach from every photograph. They combed the entire city, questioned hundreds of people, checked every soldier within a 50-kilometer radius. Nothing. That night, when even the streetlights outside seemed dim from exhaustion, Vikarev sat staring at the map with pins. The red pins marked the places where the girls disappeared, forming a creepy pattern. All near the second fire station. Why the military? Suddenly, he said hoarsely. God, his voice sounded strange. The firefighters' uniforms are the same after all. Silence hung in the room. The next day, they pulled up archival photos of the fire brigade personnel. Neat rows of smiling men in dark blue uniforms. Some of them risked their lives every day saving people, while others, like Vikarev, slowly ran their finger over the photo. Somewhere here the criminal was hiding. He could feel it in his skin, a cold, sticky premonition that didn't just send shivers down his spine. And then he saw him. The photograph was unremarkable, just an ordinary face with no trace of madness in the eyes. But when Vikarev compared it to the composite sketch drawn from the surviving victim's description, something inside him tightened. "There he is," the investigator whispered. The room became very quiet, as if even the clock on the wall had stopped ticking. Somewhere in the city, this man was putting out fires, smiling at his colleagues, maybe even patting the neighbor's children on the head. And no one suspected that beneath the mask of a hero was a real maniac. Fire station number 2 greeted Vikarev with its usual chaos, the smell of smoke, metal and sweat. Demichev, buttoned up during his shift, appeared before the investigator in all his physical might. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hands accustomed to easily controlling hoses under a monstrous water pressure. Watching how skillfully he handled the equipment, Vikarev couldn't shake off a disturbing sense of dissonance. Standing before him was a man who challenged the elements every day to save lives, and at the same time, the main suspect in the most heinous crimes, realizing that a direct arrest of such a physically formidable opponent could have unpredictable consequences. Vikarev devised a sophisticated plan under the pretext of presenting a departmental award for extinguishing fires in Engels. He persuaded Demichev to go to the station, and Demichev changed into a neat civilian suit. Like he was going on a date, Vikarev thought, and without a hint of suspicion, he got into the official car. On the way, he animatedly asked about the details of the award and the release, while Vikarev, automatically keeping up the conversation, was horrified to realize how naturally lies sounded coming from this man's mouth. The investigator's office in the Frunzensky District Police Department, flooded with the harsh light of fluorescent lamps, became the stage for one of the most terrifying moments in Vikarev's career. When the door opened and Darya Zavodnyakova entered the room with her parents, time seemed to stand still. The girl's reaction was instant and terrifying. Her body tensed up, her eyes widened. The second time, mustering all her willpower, she unerringly pointed at Demichev. The following hours of interrogation resembled a strange, almost ritualistic dance. First came confident, almost mocking denials, then irritation bordering on rage, and then attempts to find logical inconsistencies in the investigator's questions. Then irrefutable evidence was laid on the table. Fingerprints. These elusive traces of a person's presence became the main accusers. The fingerprint analysis revealed a chilling pattern. At every crime scene, in every corner where his bloody performances unfolded, Vyacheslav Demichev left his unique signature. These barely noticeable patterns on the cold metal of torture tools, on the sticky tape used to seal the victims' mouths, formed a sinister mosaic. When he saw the fingerprints, something changed in his eyes. It wasn't remorse, but rather a cold realization that the game was over. His confessions flowed in a monotonous, almost mechanical stream, as if he were reading a long memorized text. Every word, every detail of his actions fell heavily into the silence of the office. Vikarev felt chills as he wrote down the testimony. A monstrous picture was unfolding before him. Beneath the heroic uniform of a firefighter, beneath the mask of an exemplary employee, a cold-blooded maniac had been hiding for years, turning violence and death into a carefully planned ritual. His methods were honed to perfection. He knew every corner of the city, every abandoned building where he could take a victim. Vyacheslav revealed the monstrous details of his method. It turned out that he practiced his sadistic schemes for luring children into remote, deserted places on the neighbors' little kids, as if they were test subjects. He found ways to approach them, lured them out for a walk, offered to show them bugs or go get sweets, and then coldly analyzed their reactions while observing. Each such rehearsal made his method even more flawless. On one of the endless days of interrogation, his voice, previously monotonous and emotionless, suddenly came to life. He began to tell a story that made the blood run cold. 1970. The summer in Saratov was unbearably hot. Demichev, then still a young soldier who had received a short leave, returned to the city that would soon witness his first notorious taking of a life. He went fishing. It was his refuge, a place where he could be alone with his dark thoughts, watching as the water slowly carried away the stones thrown into it, disappearing into nowhere. In the evening, with a heavy fish basket still full of wriggling fish, he walked home across the intersection of Chernyshevsky and Volovaya streets. It was there that he was stopped by 3 young guys. Their request was simple: "Man, buy us some booze." Usually he would just walk by, but that evening, that fateful evening, something clicked in his mind. Maybe it was the desire to feel power over others, or just another experiment. The ones he would later conduct on defenseless children, he agreed. What followed next, Demichev described with a frightening, almost clinical precision. They finished a bottle of vodka in the nearest park, their conversation about nothing in particular. Then a sudden blow to the head with a brick, blood covered his face, but instead of pain came a strange, almost ecstatic enlightenment, his body trained by jam. The army acted with deadly efficiency. The first blow to the throat, a crunch of cartilage. The second to the temple, a dull sound, like a ripe apple falling to the ground. The third, when the fog cleared. One of the attackers lay lifeless, while the other 2, bleeding heavily, tried to crawl away. Demichev stood up, brushed off his pants, and calmly walked home, leaving behind a trail of blood that was soon washed away by the rain. When the investigators pulled out the dusty files from 1970, they were met with a chilling confirmation of an unsolved killing. The description of the perpetrator, tall, athletic build, introduced himself as Vyacheslav. The surviving witnesses never recovered from their trauma. One was left permanently disabled, another took his own life 2 years after the attack, and the 4th killing only confirmed the worst fears. His crimes did not fit the usual patterns recognized by psychologists. There was no passion or anger, only cold, calculated sadism, mixed with a strange, almost scientific interest in the suffering of his victims. When the interrogation was over and Demichev was taken away, Vikarev sat for a long time in the now empty office, staring at the stack of written pages. Somewhere there, between the lines of the report, unspoken questions remained. Where is the line that turns a hero into a monster? And is it really a monster? Vyacheslav Demichev, a siren with a pronounced sadistic tendency expressed through a love for children and a deliberate ritualized way of acting. His psychological profile is an example of a predatory, cold-blooded, deeply split personality, where the outward mask of a heroic firefighter and soldier hides absolute moral emptiness and a pathological craving for violence. Demichev exhibits a pathological attraction to children, especially to young girls. His attention to detail indicates not just a sexual interest, but a violent fetishistic fixation characteristic of a severe form of attraction to children with elements of sadism. At the same time, he was developing a complete lack of empathy. He didn't see his victims as people. It was an object-oriented attitude. For him, children were not individuals, but figures playing roles in a performance he carefully staged. This coldness, indifference to suffering, as well as the pleasure he took in observing and controlling it, are signs of dissocial personality disorder, an analog of antisocial disorder with a sadistic undertone. He gets aroused by the very process, the shadow, the blood, the victim's breathing, the tearing of the body, the empty gaze. He absorbs all of this carefully, remembers it, records it. This is an obsessive, ritualized structure of thinking, close to sexual paraphilic disorder, probably in the form of sadistic disorder or the serial sexual maniac complex described in forensic psychiatry. His memories of his first crime, committed in 1970, are not of a tragedy, but of an epiphany, which points to a possible primary psychological trauma transformed into a scenario of power. He uses violence as a tool for self-assertion, like a forbidden substance that gives a sense of control and meaning, but causes addiction. The almost complete lack of emotional coloring in his confessions, except for the pleasure in the details, demonstrates signs of alexithymia and emotional disorder. None, which makes him neither suspicious nor uncomfortable. His calmness is not a defense, but a consequence of an organic inability to empathize. However, the key point is that he was found sane. This means that after all, no obvious psychoses were recorded in him. He was aware of what he was doing and was able to control his behavior. He simply didn't want to. We are dealing with a person with a split personality who has been diagnosed with antisocial disorder, sadistic sexual paraphilia, and complete emotional detachment. The mask of a friendly firefighter is not a coincidence but a deliberate social camouflage. He didn't take lives in a fit of passion. He staged a performance and each time wrote the next chapter of his story not for memory but for pleasure. Demichev was taken out of the detention center to conduct an investigative experiment at the crime scene. The investigators are reconstructing every step, every breath, every blow, and then there's an unexpected intrusion. The father of the girl who lost her life, a man whose soul was burned in the flames of revenge, appears out of nowhere. In his hands is a pistol, cold as his hatred. He came here with one goal, to take Demichev's life. During the interrogation, he speaks calmly, almost detached. Yes, he took the weapon from his military unit. Yes, he specifically went to Kazakhstan to get it. Yes, he wanted to see the life leave the eyes of the one who took his daughter from him, but fate played a cruel joke on him. He was too late. Finally, Vyacheslav Demichev appeared before the court, the lawyers insisted on an examination, and the forensic doctors delivered their verdict. He is sane, he understood what he was doing. The sentence was announced in the early 1970s. Death penalty, no mercy, no doubts, the executioner is already prepared. At the end of 1975, a shot was fired that sent Demichev to the next world. Write in the comments what you think about this story. If you want an analysis of your personality, I'll probably leave a post under the video about how to get it. Like, dislike, and watch other videos on the channel. They're coming out, and the format is a bit different, so I recommend checking them out.